This is Transparency, a podcast by Gender Dysphoria Alliance, hosted by Aaron Kimberly and Aaron Terrell. Each week we'll be joined by people who have personal or professional experience with gender dysphoria and physical transition. We'll also discuss how our trans experiences relate to the concept of gender identity. Join us for a compassionate yet heterodox approach to the question of trans. All right, welcome to Transparency. We have Katie Herzog with us today. I don't imagine anybody tuning in is not familiar with you and your work, Katie. You also obviously host a podcast that might not be as popular as this one, but you know, you're getting there. Anyway, hand it over to you to tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for having me. My name's Katie Herzog. My podcast is called Blocked and Reported. That's sort of the only thing to introduce at this point. I'm sort of
a retired journalist.
Do I do? Sure. Lazy journalist. It's summertime, so especially lazy now. But yeah, I occasionally do a podcast with Nellie Bowles called TGIF, which is hosted on Barry Weiss's Substack, but mostly it's just Blocked and Reported.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you guys for having me.
We talk a lot about, obviously, what we will do here is talk about transition and gender dysphoria. And that's something that you've kind of been, well, you've talked before that you had kind of an experience of what we now call gender dysphoria when you were a kid, right? And then obviously you kind of clued into the wave of the transition trend. When was that, would you say?
Yeah, so actually, I'm sort of curious about how our experiences differ. I think that if I were a kid born today, I think I would be diagnosed with gender dysphoria because of the sort of concept creep of dysphoria. I don't think that I endured the sort of gender dysphoria that would like assuming that you guys had this experience that you guys did, because I didn't, it sort of resolved itself with adulthood. But I was a tomboy growing up. I was the sort of kid who thought literally, like I would pee standing. I didn't do this all the time, but sometimes I would pee standing up. And I thought that if I thought I was like, any day now I'm going to grow my dick. I thought just like, it's happening any day now. I really, I sort of modeled myself after my big brother, more, I'm a twin, and I was not close with my brother, but I was much more like him, sort of wearing his big baggy skater clothes and following him and his friends around. And then at puberty, it had a very sort of like getting my period, sort of exciting thing. And to me, it was just this like utter humiliation. I didn't tell anybody, I was so uncomfortable with it. But it sort of resolved itself later in life. I discovered that I was a lesbian sort of later. I was 20, or was I 20? I was like around 18, 19, actually came out at 20 when I started to have this like aha moment, because I went to college and I met all of these women who turns out that they're all heterosexuals. But at the time, what lesbianism was, because this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I grew up in a small town. I didn't sort of realize that lesbians could be anything other than like the Rosie O'Donnells of the world. And I wasn't attracted to Rosie O'Donnell. So when I met women who were interested in women who I was attracted to, it was like, oh, maybe something's going on. So that sort of, I think that really sort of was the stake in the heart of any dysphoria that I had, was coming to terms with sexuality. And then I was part of this queer community. I went to college in Asheville, North Carolina, not that different from are you out about where you live, Aaron?
Yeah, in Bellingham, yeah.
Okay, yeah, not that different from Bellingham. Was involved in the queer community there, and then I moved to Portland, and I was involved in the queer community there, and then sort of have been since I was 19, 20. But things started to change for me. And there were always trans guys in the groups. Like there was like trans women, maybe there'd be like one or two on the periphery, but there were always trans guys within these like mostly lesbian groups that I lived in, which I find sort of interesting because, like lots of trans activists and our allies will sort of repeat this: trans women are women, trans men are men. But trans men have always been welcome in lesbian spaces in a way that cis men are not, right? So there were always, during this time when I lived within like primary lesbian communities or queer communities, because even at the time lesbianism was sort of the term lesbian was quickly going out of style. There are always trans men within these communities, which I find sort of interesting because there's all of this rhetoric about how trans women are women and trans men are men. But if trans men were literal men, then they wouldn't be welcome in these spaces because cis men weren't welcome in these spaces. And I never had any issues with trans guys or trans women within, it felt like we were one community. It really did within this time. And then
what year was that, would you say?
Okay, so my first sort of inkling that things were changing was like 2013, 2014. So between like the year 2000, so for basically 15 years, from 2000 until like 2014, 20. So what happened in 2014 was that this was my sort of first inkling that things were changing. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my best friend there was a trans guy, and he lived in a household where there had been like 5 lesbians living in this household, and he transitioned. And I never questioned his dysphoria. Like he had been a very dysphoric child. He thought that he was a boy. He was like, he had sort of a fucked up family. Like his grandparents raised him and they raised him as a boy. He thought that he literally thought that he was a boy. And then he transitioned. And then within a year, every one of his roommates transitioned. And to me, it was like, this is a statistical an impossibility that we know that a very small percentage of the population suffers from dysphoria, is trans. How is it possible that all of you live in the same household? And I said this to him, and he didn't have any problem with it. We would talk about it and I'd be like, yeah, because he was my friend and I was close to him, my assumption was that and he was the first, my assumption was that the others were influenced by his behavior, but it still seemed like an anomaly. And then now, so this was 2014, 7 years later, I cannot tell you the number of people I know in situations just like that, who they live there. There's a household and the entire household transitions or does this sort of halfway thing where they adopt non-binary pronouns and maybe microdose, or, oftentimes have, like, there's a thing now where people do top surgery, but not testosterone. I think that's a whole other thing. I think that's just pure fashion. I think that it's like mastectomies are cool now. Which is weird. It's fucking weird. Anyway, so that was my first. So yeah, that was 2014 was when I first started to think something is changing here. And then I wrote this piece for The Stranger, the Detransitioners in 2017. And so now, which I think this is like the almost the exact 5-year anniversary of that piece, is sometime this week or maybe last week. And, 5 years later, at the time, it was really hard to find detransitioners. I had to sort of hunt for them in little corners of Reddit. And then now, they're very visible and they're everywhere. And obviously, this is something that people talk about. So that's sort of my path into this.
You kind of got wind of the social contagion right there in real life, in that little microcosm of what would later explode.
Yeah. And the number... So I'm 40. Most of my friends are from this period are, 35 to 45, 50 maybe at this point. And the number of them who have transitioned is like truly astronomical. And some of them haven't actually done anything to transition. They just identify as trans and they change their pronouns and names or whatever. It's astronomical. And the thing that I find so interesting about this is that, you guys talk about this shit all the time. There's people we see on Twitter who talk about this who talk about this stuff. But within these communities, it's like it's not happening, or it's like it's just something to celebrate. Nobody ever says, wait a second, we were all women 5 years ago and now we're all men. And we were the kind of women who hated men and now we're all men. Nobody ever says that. And that's the part that I find so interesting, is that this thing is obviously happening. It's obvious. And then, and there's so few people going, wait a second, like the emperor's dick is hanging out, guys. Like, why are we not talking about this? And not just that, but like, I have gotten literally shunned from these communities. I've gotten kicked out of these communities for being the person to say something weird is going on here. And I don't even like, if transitioning alleviates your discomfort or makes you happier and you're an adult, I don't have any fucking problem with that at all. But I don't think it's something that we should pretend isn't happening or pretend is just this sort of natural, you've all, embraced your true self, rather than, what's obvious, which is like, you guys are following each other. You all caught the same bug.
And I didn't really understand that it was that pervasive, even amongst, basically you're describing middle-aged women. falling into this.
Yeah, totally.
I wasn't okay.
Yeah. So I'm curious about for you guys. Okay, so have you observed the same thing? Or okay, first of all, before you guys transitioned, were you in like dyke circles? I know, Aaron, I know you're bisexual. Aaron,
I was in dyke circles, and so it was 2006 that I transitioned. So it was before this big wave. But so I remember, like, when you were describing, you know, the lesbians and the trans men were still hanging out, like the butches and the trans men were still buddies, and so I remember that. And then I moved away, and so I still have my circle of close friends, but I'm not really part of the community anymore. So I didn't really see it change the way that you did. And until I started working with the youth, and then you'd see all these youth coming in, and then in like little peer groups all wanting hormones together. And I could tell, like, something's weird here. This is different than how we were when we were going through that. I mean, I certainly didn't kind of dance into my doctor's office excited about it. I mean, I was tortured, right? Like, I was wanting relief from the dysphoria so there was just a very different, I don't even know how to describe it, just a different energy. And I could tell that there just seemed to be a different motivation.
And when you sought treatment, did your doctor shame you or anything like that? I mean, there was much more stigma in 2006. It was virtually unknown to most of the world, or to most of the country.
I wasn't shamed at all. The clinic I went to was a trans specialized clinic. So that was the place to go in Vancouver at the time. Yeah. So.
And how did your like friends and family react to your transition?
My family was okay about it. The community, the lesbian community grieves every time one of us transitions.
And now there's no one left to grieve. They've all transitioned.
Yeah. Just a sad state of affairs. But yeah, it's I mean, I think lesbians and trans men have a complicated relationship.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that has
out and
I think that's really changed. And because I think that in those days, there was a sense of like, oh, we've lost one, especially if you're butch, we've lost a butch. And now so many of the butches are transitioning that to publicly say that you were grieving somebody who transitioned would be tantamount to a hate crime. And would be perceived as incredibly disrespectful. So I'm sure that happens in rad femme spaces, but within the sort of wider queer community, if such a thing exists, I haven't seen much of that. It's all celebration.
Yeah, I remember before I kind of left the whole community, I remember it being really complicated when people were like planning pride events, for example, and normally they would have women's only spaces for pride, and I remember overhearing kind of the organizers really struggling with, how do we manage this? Like, we want to include the trans men because they've been part of our community this whole time, and they're our friends or our partners sometimes. But there are also some trans women around who identified as lesbians, and what do we do? Like, I mean, they were really stumped about how do we best navigate this. And so in some cases, they just said, well, it's going to be a no penis rule then.
Yeah.
As long as the trans men don't get one, and as long as the trans women do, we'll figure it out. But I mean, it was kind of a joke, but I can appreciate how complicated it all was to
totally
organizing events. And where do you draw the line?
And now
then they can at least talk about it. They can, hash that out, Now you absolutely could not try and figure out.
Now it's probably illegal to have that conversation.
Yeah. Aaron, so we're all in the same region, basically.
Yeah.
And I do think that things out here are probably different than they are in Kansas or whatever. But I mean, I've observed lots of what I've observed happens in North Carolina, but like within queer scenes, so even if you're in the South, it's still the queer scene in the South, which is, its own thing. But for Aaron, what about you? Were you in a queer scene before all of this?
No, I was, I was not a lesbian prior to transitioning, and my friends were all sort of, normie. I didn't transition until I was 27. I'd had dysphoria all my life, but because I was attracted to men, transitioning just made no sense. It just seemed like that's like, I wasn't worried about like dating, like it wasn't like a relationship hindrance. It was just like, this looks patently insane, you know? And that was my hesitation for a long time. Anyway, and then it started, you know, when it was kind of became visible online, I was like, oh, this is something that I can do. I went ahead and did it. But I didn't know any, there was one trans guy who worked at my office, and that was actually one of the things that made me go, oh, I can do this. Totally. So I was a bit of a social contagion victim there.
I think you can say the same thing about, like, that's sort of how I mean, I would have at some point, I think, realized my own homosexuality anyway, but I do think that social contagion,
you need something in real life to be like, oh, okay, right. This is real. This is
people talk about how visibility matters. Well, visibility does matter, and this is sort of why. And I don't like people think that social contagion is a negative term. I don't think it's inherently negative at all. We are a mimetic species. Yeah. Like, everything that we do is influenced by the people around us. That is a part of being a human. But yeah, people act like I see this all the time on Twitter. You know, I'll say something about social contagion and people are saying, you are literally calling trans people a disease. No, of course not.
Or they say you're accusing teenage girls of being so stupid and like that they're just going to fall for a trend. And that's another thing that they spin when you talk about social contagion.
They are. I mean, like, when I was a teenager, half of the girls in my high school were cutters or bulimics or anorexic. Like, nobody comes from the womb saying, like, I know, I'll just like slice into my arm and it'll make me feel better. Like, that was just a thing then, and this is a thing now.
Yeah, they've always been the demographic who's most susceptible to these kinds of pressure, kind of things.
Yeah, and girls want to fit in. It's like, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is if you do something permanent and you realize it doesn't actually help you. That's the problem. And so I think that's one thing that's different about, and obviously people hate trans people. Some trans people hate when you talk about this kind of thing, but like, for lack of a better term, like true trans or whatever, people with gender true scum, trans med, whatever it's called, you know, somebody who has like actual dysphoria versus people who, oftentimes there's this thing now where people say they don't even have dysphoria, they're transitioning anyway. And I'm curious for you guys, like, how was your dysphoria? Was it rooted in your physical body, or was it rooted in sort of gender roles and I want to be able to do this thing that I can't do because I'm a girl? Or was it like an absolute, like, purely physical, I can't stand being in this body?
Yeah, for me, yes, it was not entirely physical. I think it comes from somewhere. I don't like. That's a lot of what we talk about here is like, what causes gender dysphoria? What's the manifestation of this? But it was a very personal thing that felt very much physically like my body is wrong. It should not be this way. And so I was expected to outgrow it, and I did not outgrow it. And then so realized, okay, I can solve this thing. And so I was totally a true scum once I found out that, you know, what that terminology was. I assumed that everybody who transitioned had the same experience that I did, which was deep, inescapable, ill at ease with the physical body. And so then once transition got more and more popular around like 2015, I want to say, and you start hearing these terms like transmedicalist and true scum, and that being a pejorative. And I was kind of like, wait, if this is a specific kind of trans person, then that means that a lot of people who don't experience this are transitioning, and that's kind of concerning. But I kind of clued in really in about 2017, because I live in a, you know, as we discussed, a pretty progressive college town, and I just kind of assumed I was one of a handful of trans people here, not realizing. And then so suddenly there's all these trans men around, and I'm befriending them, and they're talking about how, well, no, I don't have dysphoria, and, you know, I transitioned because I'm trans. And I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean? And they're like, you're making me feel emotionally unsafe. And then we terminate the conversation. And so I was like, something real odd is afoot here. And that's when I found your article and Lisa Littman's, and I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
People are seeing this.
So what's it like to be in Bellingham as sort of an out problematic gender critical trans man? Do people give you shit there?
No, I'm not a very, all my friends are the same normie friends I've had since I was a teenager. I'm not a public figure. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I've never been like in a queer scene at all. Yeah. So it's never been an issue for me. And you know, have like 5 friends. So
that helps.
Never been impacted.
Yeah. What about you, Aaron? Has it caused problems in your life?
Not in my immediate life, no. I mean, because I do live apart from the scene at this point. I think if I was still like in Vancouver and still trying to socialize with some of those people, it would probably be very difficult.
Yeah, totally.
But I've already been kicked out of every Facebook group that I can be, and
yeah, me too. If I really want to check out on what's going on with the local queer exchanges, I can log onto my wife's account, but it's just usually people asking for money.
What was your response then? Like, in 2017, you kind of, I think you were told when you were writing the detransition piece that there was going to be, you know, some backlash to this, and you're like, oh, that probably not, or maybe a little bit, and then suddenly, you know, you're being, you know, Katie Herzog is a transphobe, spray painted and whatnot. Like,
yeah, I mean, I knew there was going to be backlash. I didn't realize that it was going to be so much, and I didn't realize that it was going to impact my personal relationships, because for one thing, I was naive enough to think that being a part of the queer community would sort of save me. Identity does not, despite the emphasis on identitarianism at this point in the culture, it does not save you. And in fact, I think in some cases makes it worse if you're a part of the community. But I knew there was going to be backlash. What I didn't know was how many people who I had like known and loved for years, and people I had been really good friends with, who would drop me. And they did. And like people who know that I'm not transphobic because they have seen me be like close friends with trans people. And not to be all like, some of my best friends were Black, but some of my best friends were trans. And they actually were better about it than the cis people, maybe because they didn't feel the need to like perform allyship for their own people. But so that was and remains the sort of most surprising, difficult part. And that has actually increased in recent years, where like more and more people who I thought had we gotten over that hump, and then for some reason in the past like year or so, there's been like more and more waves of older and closer friends dropping me. And I learned this usually because all of these people who are so fucking brave cannot tell me to my face that they have a problem with me. And so I will learn this because I realize I've been like defriended on social media. And I talked to a friend about this. One of my like few remaining old friends, we talked about it a few months ago, and she was like, look, people have come to me. She lives in San Francisco. We haven't lived in the same city in a long time. And she said, you know, people have come to me and they have demanded that I end our friendship. People who don't know me. And she declined to do that because she's a good person. But a hell of a lot of people were like, okay, sure. You know that I'm friends with Katie Herzog. I will just end this friendship I have had for 10 or 15 years because random person tells me to. And that's been a very instructive and disheartening thing to realize, that people that you invested lots of time and energy in are basically fucking cowards. So that's been sort of the hardest part about all of this, and the part that is like the most lingering. But everything else, like, I mean, the backlash was great for my career. It was like scary at first, but I can like thank all of these people who, you know, made a big stink about this article for, you know, I got a job at The Stranger out of it. My podcast, a lot of that, the attention that we've gotten comes from Jesse and I's stance on this stuff. So it's been great for my career. I should send them a fruit basket. But yeah, that's been sort of the like real lingering downside, is that, you know, people who I like, whose weddings I went to and who I lived with, pretend that I no longer exist. But other than that, no downsides, no regrets.
It's such a big change over the last 15 years. Like, you know, from going from, you know, what I was mentioning of people organizing events and trying to think through these things in a thoughtful way, to be inclusive, but how do we do that? And at least the conversation was happening. And
yeah,
I don't know if this has just sort of been a slow kind of mind creep, or if it's been more, because it feels sudden that things have gotten so weird.
Yeah, I think it's been both gradual and sudden. And I think part of it comes from Donald Trump and the Trump moment. And there was this, after Donald Trump was elected, a lot of people on the left had this sort of like, okay, now is the time to show that I am on the right side of history. And their way of showing that they're on the right side of history was being very publicly performative about their politics and their goodness. And, like how many on Facebook, every time, like there was another round of this after the Roe decision. If anybody supports this, unfriend me right now. And the same thing happened after Trump. If you voted for Donald Trump, if you voted for Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein or whatever, unfriend me right now. There was so much of that. And I understood it at the time. I still understand it now because it feels like these are issues of life and death. And it feels like there's a good side and a bad side and everything feels very black and white, but none of that's true. Right. And it's also counterproductive because if you want to change people's opinion, the way to do it isn't to like take your presence out of their life and say like, this is my basketball and I'm going home. Fuck you for not being like me. It doesn't work. It's much more effective, as we should know from the gay rights movement. It is much more effective to stay in people's lives if you want to change them. Not that like changing people should be a primary motivation of remaining in relationships with people. You should do it because it's important to have relationships with people. And it's important to have relationships with people who don't believe the same things that you do. But I think a lot of this came from the Trump moment, and it just this feeling that now is the time. We are, it's Germany 1936. It is time to put my foot down and say, I am on the right side of history.
I guess it does, when you put it like that, it does make sense to me too, that people feel like, okay, we need to reinforce our walls of this fortress because we feel like there's a very real threat.
Totally.
But I would much rather the LGBT community put its heads together and recognize the mistakes that we've made and problem solve and figure this out than to leave it to the Trumps of the world to figure it out for us.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the problems. Like, I wish that this was a conversation that all of us could be having in private and we could figure this shit out, and not have this and not the three. I mean, not that I don't want to have this conversation in private, in public, but all of this stuff, like the right wing influence on what's going on in the United States is really bad. And it's not just bad if you're a gender dysphoric kid. It's bad if you're a person who is skeptical of trans youth healthcare because, and I've said this a bunch of times on our show and elsewhere, because every time Texas passes some anti-trans law, Oregon or California or wherever, or the country of Canada will respond to that by passing some law liberalizing access to healthcare. And it just goes back and forth forever and ever and ever.
And it seems like every time the pendulum swings, it seems to swing farther, right?
Totally. California has decided that it is now a sanctuary state for trans kids, or kids who call themselves trans. Whether or not they actually have gender dysphoria is probably another question. So I wish that all politics could, all of these cultural war issues could, we could all get together, have some tea and figure it out. But that's obviously not how anything works, unfortunately.
The good old potluck.
A fucking lesbian potluck. What happened to the lesbian
potluck? That solves
potluck?
everything.
Yeah. Bring your lentils.
See, what has struck me by such surprise is like the experience that you were talking about, and a sort of Twitter friend, Robbie's talked about this a lot. It was like, when he's a gay man, when he came out about being what we now call gender critical, all of his personal close friends dropped him as well, similar to what happened to you. And I can't fathom it because I guess, again, I've never been part of any sort of like queer community. I'm not sure if that's really even relevant, but like when I have my group of friends, no matter how many new people would come to a dinner party or whatever, we could have really complicated conversations about, difficult topics. And a lot of people could like hotly disagree, and it was not really a problem. And so now when these conversations happen like this, and basically you're a fascist scum, even though, you were my, dear friend last week. It's like, I just don't understand how people's brains can do that. Like, how many, that's the thing, is like, I can understand a few people who are just, again, totally cowards, but it's just the sheer numbers. It seems like, the whole contrarian heterodorks. I listen to that podcast too much. Heterodox, excuse me. People, it's like it just seems so strange that in order to talk honestly and that we're a fringe group of people to just talk about things as they really are. That's what's all been so mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, you probably have a particular personality traits that lend you to that. I think most people are like, I don't think there's anything about queer communities that are, maybe there is, more sort of inherently cloistered and elitist in a way, or exclusive in a way. Maybe there is, but I imagine that these same things happen within, a church community. Let's say you're in a, in a whatever, like a very religious community, and it turns out that somebody had an abortion or whatever. Probably that the same shit happens.
Yeah, no, I grew up in that environment.
Okay.
Where it's an evangelical Christian, and then this one teenager, this girl, she was a lesbian, and suddenly she was out, and nobody was meant to interact with her because basically it could also be tainted. And so I remember that inside strict religious confines, but now it's like, now there's just this religion has engulfed.
So so how did your family react when you transitioned?
So I was basically sort of estranged from my mom by the time that I transitioned, and she wasn't really, a factor in there. It's really complicated, the kind of my family's trajectory. My dad was never particularly religious, but my mom was hardcore religious. She kind of kept us in a very strict, like, we were homeschooled, went to church, 2 or 3 times a week. Only friends were in the, the church community. And my dad just worked all the time, but he wasn't really into the whole, he didn't really believe the same things my mom did, but who cares? It wasn't really an issue. And then, but yeah, I became an atheist at around 21 or so, and then became a genderology extremist about 7 years later. So I was like a Christopher Hitchens atheist too. I was like, this is bullshit. It's dangerous. Like, I'm going to tear it all down. And then a few years later, I was suddenly like, we all have a gendered soul, and sometimes that can mismatch from our body. And
how did you?
And let's give kids surgery to fix it.
So what was your path out of the Church of Gender?
It's meeting all those people who were transitioning to be trans. They would literally say, I don't have gender dysphoria, but I have to transition to show that I am trans. And I was like, well, this is something weird going on here. And so I started digging in more and like kind of re-immersed myself in the trans community online. And it was entirely different. Like, that was the kind of stuff that was being talked about. And I was like, oh wait, maybe what I have isn't real. Like, because I was also started to read about the Detransitioners experiences, and a lot of their experiences of gender dysphoria actually felt a lot more similar to my own. And then for whatever reason, transition didn't work for them, or made their dysphoria worse, or whatever it was. And just hearing different experiences of this made me realize, okay, I had some experience. I don't know what it was. That led me to believe this. But yeah, it was easier than letting go of religion. Because like I've said this a bunch of times, is that coming face to face or accepting the reality of mortality is a lot more difficult than accepting the reality of biology. So it's like, I'd already done this before, and letting go of this belief, this kind of, I feel, for me, I think of religion as like a loophole. Religions that have an afterlife, they're kind of like a loophole to death, or a loophole to mortality, and that's kind of what gender ideology was for me. It was like, this is a loophole. Like, I'm not actually female. Like, I can, this belief system is giving me an out, is telling me that my brain really is male, and I want to believe that, and this is allowing me to. But yeah, that undoing that kind of security blanket was, kind of a piece of cake.
I'm sure.
When I was younger.
Yeah, having no everlasting life is sort of bigger shock to the system, I would imagine.
I've always been also somebody who's just terrified of death. That's a little bit of an overshare, but like just terrified of death. And so like it was very difficult to give that up. Yeah.
Have you found a way to sort of come to terms with that?
No.
I'm looking for some tips here.
Sorry, no. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely am not a Christopher Hitchens atheist anymore, in that I think that religion actually does far more good than harm. And I feel like, you know, I don't know, I'd kind of like to be in something. No, because I've kind of, you know, the whole kind of embraced being just a kind of a true skeptic, like I was committed to being in my 20s, and then obviously I wasn't. So that's my purpose, is just committing to not falling for it again.
It is interesting how a lot of the sort of what did they call the atheists, the like 90s 2000s atheists, like the
new atheists?
Yeah, the new atheists.
Yeah.
How a lot of those communities have really gone super woke. In a way that does see them sort of embracing tenets that to us may seem religious. Or like the science-based medicine. Jesse was tweeting about them today. These people are supposed to be rigorous skeptics when it comes to quackery, but they seem to take off or put on their blinders within this one particular of medicine.
Right, where some babies are just born into the wrong bodies.
Totally, that makes absolute sense. There's a right body and a wrong body, and every once in a while they just like skip the right one on the assembly line. Yeah. This idea that everybody has a gender identity. Do you guys believe that?
No. Sorry, I can't speak for you, Aaron, but I'm pretty sure.
I never really believed in like the gender identity model is actually kind of new to me. I was oblivious to that.
Interesting.
Like, to John Money and that whole line of thinking, I was oblivious to. So I was more, because I was a part of the gay and lesbian community, I initially just understood it as there's some really masculine women and some really effeminate men that seem to experience this.
Yeah, I think that's how I thought of it when I first like met trans people as a young adult. It was sort of like, oh, you're super butch or super gay. That was the, you know, and then when I started to meet non-binary, that was like, oh, okay, so you're trans light. Like, you know, it's this sort of spectrum of like masculine to feminine, and everybody would sort of fit somewhere on that spectrum. But then now it's like, you know, you have women who are completely gender conforming, telling people that they're non-binary or whatever.
You've probably seen this too, you know, in our neck of the woods. Is I've seen a lot more is like typically feminine looking young women with like he/him badges on them. And, you know, a lot of them have deep voices too. It's like, oh, you're hitting the testosterone too.
Yeah. You know, so I have seriously considered microdosing, not because I have dysphoria, but because I want to be able to do a pull up. And I do think, and you know, I like follow lots of trans guys on Instagram, or I don't follow them. I like check in on their accounts because I refuse to follow them. And the amount of, did you guys have this experience? Like, you know, higher sex drive, all of a sudden you're strong in a way that you never were as a woman. That sounds fucking amazing. It's like confidence, you know, aggression. It sounds like a performance enhancing drug, because it is.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So did you guys have this at, like when you started taking testosterone, this sort of like, holy shit, I can do anything experience?
It definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say it was really dramatic change, but it was a gradual change, you know, of slowly developing more muscle mass and things like that. But it's a mood enhancer.
Yeah.
I think that was probably one of the first things I noticed, is that, and if I'm late or if I accidentally miss a dose, I just don't feel like I have as much energy.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. You know, if there weren't side effects, like I don't want to like go through puberty again. I don't want to get acne. I don't want to, you know, get back hair. If you didn't have those unfortunate side effects, I would seriously consider it.
I feel the same way about smoking.
Yeah.
It wasn't healthy.
Yeah, I feel the same way about testosterone that I do alcohol. It's like I just like doing it. I know it's not good for me, but here I go.
Yeah.
But I'll just I think I have a kind of a more subtle experience of it because I was put on half the typical dose for the first 5 years, and then it was up, and so it was a very gradual thing. I never noticed much of a change in my moods. Anger was easier to come by, and yeah, it was just kind of, a little bit more energy. Like I suddenly, like I see a fence, I'm like, oh, I want to climb that. No,
yeah. Did you find that you were all of a sudden better at math?
This is not. I only noticed this kind of recently, and it could just be aging or whatever. But I have noticed that I got this significantly less interested in like people and relationship dynamics and more interested in things, objects, it's just.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I've always been like that. So I wouldn't say that I would ever really change, but I don't know.
You have a masculine soul.
Well, yeah, that must be it. Because I don't know how much, because I did have an ovotesticular DSD, and I don't know to what extent that already, because my testosterone levels were already higher than normal.
That's interesting. Okay, so were you diagnosed at birth, or did that come
No,
later?
I was diagnosed when I was 19.
Interesting.
So that might be why I didn't feel a dramatic difference, because my brain was probably already exposed to testosterone for most of my life.
Wow, that is really interesting. Now, if only you were an identical twin, and some way to tell if you would have grown up to be trans if you didn't have the DSD, that's very interesting.
Yeah, we're a tiny minority in the trans community, but there are certain DSDs that are known to have a higher rate of same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria. Yeah,
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think there's actually a chapter on it in Alice Dreger's Galileo's Middle Finger. I forget the name of the particular DSD, but yeah, they're more likely to grow up to be lesbians and experience gender dysphoria resultingly.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So many studies that need to be done.
Yeah, and probably won't be. They're too inconvenient.
I think we're getting there, though. I really do. I think the speed at which we're reaching the end of the entire media and thought blackout on anything trans related, I feel like it's crumbling quite quickly.
Yeah, I hope we're like, it's interesting because I noticed on Twitter, Aaron, you commented on fairly queer trans man. I think he's a journalist, and he was saying, well, we're just to warn you, we're all about to disappear. We're all about to lose our public voice. We're not going to be able to ever, I'm having trouble publishing articles now. And I almost commented, really, because I'm actually finding it easier to publish articles.
What's his name? The guy from Slate?
His name's Evan Irk something.
Right,
Evan Irk. He wrote a piece about detransitioners and just completely discrediting their claim. Anyway, it was atrocious, like a year or two ago. But that is the very person who, Katie, remember I sent you an article. It's like why I'm still a butch lesbian. Now
Yeah. What was the time when I can't remember what the date was on that? He wrote a piece about one of the people I interviewed for my detransition piece, Kai Shivers, now known as Kai Shivers, who now says that like retransition, but I think still goes by she. And now like says that everything that they basically said that they were lying to me during this interview, and has come out sort of against detransitioners and gender crits because I think it had something to do with a breakup. But that's just the gossip that I heard that Evan neglected to mention on his in his piece about Kai Shivers changing their mind.
When I was trying to, I was DMing with Evan for a while. I can't remember. Oh, yeah, because after I read that article, I was like, well, this is fascinating. Like, how did you go from this is why I'm still a butch lesbian? And he was talking a bunch about, in that article, basically saying how gender stereotypes are unnecessary. And just because I'm masculine doesn't mean I am a man. And I was like, okay. And now you're just uber on the gender train, and very vehemently anti anyone who's gender critical or even anyone who detransitions. And so I asked him on the podcast. I was like, normally we don't.
Oh, you had him on the show?
No, I asked him, and he definitely declined very aggressively. Let's say.
Too bad.
Yeah. I was like, we don't usually have people on that we disagree with, but I don't want to debate you. I just want to hear what that experience was like, how your mind came to change like that. Anyway, so he denied, but we kind of kept like in communication via DM, and he was basically saying how he's heard everything I'm saying before, and I should really listen to Kai Shivers because she had the exact she was a gender critical person as well, or I can't remember how he phrased it, but I should listen to her. And I was like, wait, so she retransitioned, but you're using she, her pronouns? Like, he's like, well, I can't explain her gender to you. Like,
yeah. Okay. I think that if you obviously identity is unstable for some people, and obviously some people are unstable. I think it is ill-advised to put your eggs in the basket of somebody who would publicly admit to lying or publicly disavow. Just like there's a lot of drama surrounding that person. I think Evan might come to regret, like I do. I regret relying on Kai Shivers for an interview. I think Evan might also regret that. Who knows where Kai Shivers is going to be in the next detransition to retransition to detransition to who knows where Evan will be even. Evan seems to have a shifting gender identity as well.
Oh, really?
Well, I just mean in terms of the, I'm a butch lesbian. I would never transition to I'm a man.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed that's becoming more and more a part of the trans narrative, though, is this idea of that shifting and that it's just fluid and we're all on a gender journey and we can transition and then retransition and we can just keep doing this forever.
Yeah.
The most insidious part, I think, is when you're talking about transition regret, and now they're phrasing that as stigma against detransitioners. The only reason you'd be cautious about, transition regret is to stigmatize detransitioners, which is just infuriating.
Right.
Yeah, I've never heard a detransitioner say that.
No.
Yeah, I do think these things have changed really rapidly. I expect them to change even further, and you can see this in sort of the media coverage of this. There are lots of things that there's a piece in New York Magazine a couple weeks ago, maybe a week ago, about some guy, they them, wrote this piece about how basically against pronoun circle jerks. He goes by they them. This is like shit that I was writing for The Stranger 5 years ago, and was people were literally spray painting that I was a bigot around the city. And now these things are being published in the pages of New York Magazine, which I think is great. I would like an apology, but since that will never be forthcoming, I will comfort myself by knowing that the vibe is shifting. But yes, it has happened quickly, and who knows what's going to happen. I mean, you think people will start getting their the people who got their Harry Potter tattoos removed, you think they'll get them back? They'll unremove their Harry Potter tattoos?
I am really curious what people are going to, how people are going to justify on the other side of this. Take for example all the people who defamed you and who were friends and dropped you. Like when it's all revealed to be an atrocious experiment on vulnerable people and children, and we know where this is going. It's how do so the people who the J.K. Rowlings and everybody who's been just absolutely smeared by famous people and not so famous people, it's I think you kind of alluded to 1930s Germany earlier, so I feel privileged at liberty to do so. But it's that article, The Screamers, or that essay, The Screamers, about the people saying, "Look, wake up! This is happening. This is happening," and eventually everybody's going to be like, "Oh shit, that happened," and I condoned it and endorsed it and ridiculed those who are trying to raise alarms. Especially in this age where it's also public. It's also
the record admitted.
Is there. Yeah. What do you guys think that's going to look like?
I don't think people are going to apologize. There's a I got really interested in learning about satanic panic and the repressed memory craze a few years ago. And there was a lot of that happening in Washington State. There were cases in Olympia, cases in Wenatchee. And I have some friends who are from Wenatchee, Washington. In Wenatchee, they had this very, very bizarre culmination of event. They called it, I believe it was called the Ring, where there were these rumors that all of these people in the community, people who had been well loved within the community, Sunday school teachers, pastors, teachers, were accused of these horrific and impossible crimes. A kid would say, my Sunday school teacher came into my bedroom in the middle of the night and stole me away and took me to a cave and made me eat dead babies, shit like that, just total impossibilities. People went to jail for these crimes. And of course, this also was happening at the, sort of some similar confluences. There were some like there's this famous cover of Ms. Magazine around this time where the cover is something like "Believe Them," So you had basically like feminists and also some Christians, and the media sort of all complicit within spreading this panic. And I have some of these friends from Wenatchee. All of this was discredited, and I asked them about it one day, and they were like, they had never, the fact that these people were subsequently exonerated had never sort of filtered down through their community. So they had heard of, they were kids at the time, they were young teenagers, and they knew that this wild thing had happened, that there was the Ring. But they didn't know that these people weren't guilty. And I interviewed this woman who had been from this community, and she was very faithful, and she had sort of forgiven everybody. But my friend who's from there, her dad was a pediatrician. And I asked her I said, why don't you ask your dad about this next time you go home? And she did. And it turns out that he was one of these expert witnesses who were testifying against members of his own community. And he did not want to talk about it with her. And he said, at the time, we thought we were doing the right thing. And I think he's a good person. And I think that a lot of the people who have been, on the other side of the trans issue than us are oftentimes good people, and they genuinely believe that they are saving people's lives because this is what they have been told over and over and over. And I don't fault them for believing these things. Most people are not skeptical by nature, I don't think, and they think that they are doing the right thing because this is the message that they have gotten. So how will they feel when everything shakes out? Probably pretty fucking stupid. Will they admit this? Probably not. But I don't think most people do.
Yeah, I'm not really expecting any apologies either.
Yeah.
I think somehow the narrative will just start to morph and shift into something else, right? To save face.
Yeah.
And try to wrap all of this into their worldview.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. People have apologized to me, but nobody I'm close. Like, I've had people come up to me and say, like, I thought that you were a bigot and a TERF. And then I read your work, and I'm sorry, I believe what people said to you, but it's not, but these are strangers. These are people who have read my work. It's not like anybody I have known closely has or will ever apologize. Not holding my breath for that one. I'll just enjoy being right from a distance, alone from a distance.
You need to buy a billboard that says,
I told you so, in the pride colors. That's funny. I am sort of, so this might be something that you guys and I disagree on. I have, and I'm not sure if you guys have as well. Maybe you have. I have gotten not nearly as much, but I have gotten some like real hate from gender crits, specifically around the Graham Linehan shit. And I have, which has been very instructive. I've also discovered through a personal connection that there are very real TERFs who actually do hate trans people, and they talk about this shit openly on Twitter, or at least under a pseudonym, and it's disgusting. It's I think oftentimes it's women who sort of admire Valerie Solanas and are like very, very radical in that way. Like, hate trans men because trans men betrayed the sex, and hate trans women because trans women are males. And this is not something that I had ever really seen until I sort of fell into this due to a family member becoming a like real TERF, a family member who had been has been like LGBTQ throughout time, and now has landed in a very, very, very turfy position. And I have been trying to be a moderating influence. But I have seen the other side, and I think there's less threats of violence probably, but I think it is just as toxic as the radical, trans activist. What do you guys think about it?
We've talked about this before. They're basically two sides of the exact same coin.
Totally.
It would seem. I got plenty of taste of that. They like to say things, but we do disagree a bit on the Graham Linehan stuff. We talked about that back when that drama was shaken out. That I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the ways that Graham says things, but I appreciate that what he's doing. But yes, so there was like this great gender critical radical feminist schism that happened late 2021. There's the very toxic fringe of the.
What happened?
Yeah, they're not gender critical. Well, so what happened was. Actually, it was our last week's guest, Debbie Hayton. She was on, So she was on Gender: A Wider Lens, Sasha and Stella's podcast, right? Yeah. And Sasha and Stella obviously use she/her pronouns with her, and they called the episode "The Pink Mist" because it was all about the euphoria experience and whatnot. Anyway, they got absolutely demolished by
for using her. Feminists. For using Debbie's pronouns?
For platforming her, for using the she/her pronouns, for basically they picked apart every sentence spoken in that episode, and it was a pile-on that obviously Debbie is always at the bottom of pile-ons of radical feminists and trans activists. I have so much respect for her because she just keeps going despite fire from every direction.
God.
But, so they defame the Gen Spect and Gender: A Wider Lens, and because they're moderate on this issue. Anyway, and at one point, Artie, who I big fan of. I know you guys have your the squabbles, but he came in at Debbie's defense, and he'd been drinking too much, and he said he's a very emotionally expressive person. Like he makes arguments emotional, and I don't appreciate that. That's definitely not how I communicate, or it's just. But he's an emotional guy, and he'd been drinking, and he basically said a lot of radical feminists basically think and talk about AGPs with bloodlust, and essentially it was true.
That's true.
It's
true.
He could have phrased it a different way, but it was entirely true, and that just kind of threw a whole propane tank on the existing fire. And and then so that's it just got uglier and uglier from that.
He also said that in the context of, because he had been talking about having a friend who had AGP who had, I think, commit suicide. I think he died by suicide. So I think he was also just I was bringing up probably that incident of losing a friend. And I mean, I don't know what the circumstances were around that loss either. But that's how I interpreted that comment of they have bloodlust is, you're bullying and pushing people to the point of death sometimes, which is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This instinct to pick on everybody, like picking on Debbie Hayton. What advantage is there? What possible advantage is there? And you see this. I sort of watch these things from a distance because I'm not an activist, and I'm not really involved in these communities other than a sort of observer and commentator. But you see the same things happening that happen in every progressive space, it seems like, especially every online progressive space, where there's these purity tests and infighting, and eventually the whole fucking thing crumbles, much to the joy of the people that you have been previously fighting against. And because this all happens publicly on Twitter, I think it's sort of an embarrassment, one that I enjoy because I like drama and it's interesting to me. But this is one of the problems with having these conversations with public, is that people can see how fucking crazy everybody is.
I think a lot of what fuels it is, speaking of like, say, that toxic fringe of radical feminism, is they don't look at the broader culture of how this is all playing out. They only see it within the confines of their social media bubble. Yeah. And everybody who's kind of taking a tone that's more public facing and accessible to maybe people who disagree with you or normies, it's like, you are obviously an infidel if you are not, right, as ideologically pure as them.
Yeah, we get a lot of that. We get people mad at us because we like don't misgender people, and we don't. I will make some exceptions to that. Like for instance, if there's some dude who decides that he's going to go by they them because it's like politically expedient, I'm not going to do that. Which there's a couple of like writers who have announced this. It's not because I'm trans or have gender dysphoria. I'm doing this for political reasons, and I don't fuck with that. But for the most part,
also, is it really disrespectful to trans people to do that? I mean, how's there any other way to interpret that?
It is. Yeah, I can put on my trans shirt for the day. Call me whatever.
Be putting on, a feather headdress.
Yeah. My culture is not your costume, fucker. I do find, like, I not just the fact that misgendering I find unkind, but I think if your goal is to demonstrate, is to like win political battles, I don't think it's politically expedient either. It makes you look like an asshole. To the outside, it makes you look like an asshole. And that's something that, there's, and it's like everybody makes exceptions to this, even someone like Graham who does misgender people. Well, he doesn't, I doubt he would misgender you guys. Would he?
No, he hasn't. We've been on.
He hasn't.
Right. Yeah. Right. So he's not going to do it to his friends, but he's going to do it to his enemies. And I think that's kind of fucked up too.
I think he and Artie both have the perspective of it's a courtesy bestowed on people they respect. And so when somebody is behaving, disrespectfully, it's like they're not extending that courtesy, apparently.
Yeah, I think it's inconsistent and it's silly, and I don't get that. It like there are, there's also a difference between public and private speech. What I say to my wife about somebody is very different than what I say publicly. And I am looser with the misgendering certain people when it not everybody, just certain people.
But couldn't you just extend that they're just being completely transparent in that discourse? Like
maybe they are being transparent, but that doesn't mean it's still smart. And obviously, if you look at what has happened, strategic. Right, it's not strategic. And if you look at what has happened to Graham, I don't read his stuff, but the sense, unless I get a Google alert from my name that says that he's been talking about me again, or somebody forwards it to me. I think if you look at what happened, like I think that Graham is suffering. I think he's suffering a lot because he has turned his life into about this fight, a fight that he's not a part of this community. He's a total outsider, in both like the feminist side, lesbian side. He's a straight dude. I feel bad for the guy. I really do. Like to let something take over your life to the point where you lose your family over it. I think it's sad and unhealthy.
We definitely still disagree on this. I commend. I know. He's obviously dealing with a lot. I don't really want to kind of comment on Graham's mental state or whatnot, but I think having anybody with a platform talking about this is a net positive. That's my perspective, and I definitely don't subscribe to the stay in your lane kind of stuff. It's like he sees kind of aggressively privileged men, stomping all over feminists, and he's like, oh, well, let me say something about this. And maybe he's saying it the wrong way, but I don't know. I think he's a net positive.
I don't think he is. I think he's a net negative, because you can hold him up as one of the extremists who he becomes, if he becomes the face of the sort of gender critical movement. I don't think it's good for people who are making more moderate arguments. The same way that you don't want, a moderate conservative shouldn't want Milo Yiannopoulos to be the face of their movement. because he does have a high profile, J.K. Rowling, I think, is a much better sort of public figure if there needs to be a public face to attach to this sort of thing.
I wonder how much of that is like the UK versus North America, just culturally, and because they've been doing, they've been in knee deep or not neck deep in this now for longer than we have. Yeah. Our needle in North America is barely just starting to move. So that might be part of it, is they're further ahead and things are a lot more ugly there, I think, than they are here. And I think that's coming here once this is more debated out and open in public. I think it's going to bring out a lot more ugliness, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then there'll be backlash as well, to whatever backlash. Yeah. It feels like we're in a very, very fragile place right now, where there's more attention on this issue and it's more possible. Outlets are platforming people with more gender critical views in a way that just was basically impossible for the last few years. But also, some of these laws are really fucked up. I mean, just horrible. Like the idea that you're going to take kids from their parents. That's insane. Like, let's put kids in, like, they're going to have any positive outcomes by taking kids from loving families and putting them in foster care. It's so fucked up. Yeah. It really is.
And it's criminalizing the parents who've been told by the medical profession that
they're following the fucking guidelines. And even if we disagree about the guidelines, even if the three of us think that the guidelines are wrong, or at least wrong in part, they're still doing what their doctors are telling them. There has to be some way to reform this, but it has to start with the doctors. It has to start with medical organizations and places like WPATH saying, wait a second, let's maybe like revisit these standards of care.
Oh, they did.
They are. Yeah.
It's atrocious.
Yeah.
I mean,
you don't think that 14 is old enough to consent to a double mastectomy, Aaron? Really? You don't think that?
Maybe it's a good age to identify as a eunuch and proceed in that direction, but no, they do. They have a whole chapter on eunuchs. It's like I think WPATH is going to be the perfect undoing of this. Honestly, I think when people read what they are endorsing, everybody's gonna be like, oh shit, this is all just.
So what are they saying about what do they call it? Null or nullification? What are their guidelines for the eunuch thing?
Oh, do you remember, Aaron?
Is that separate?
We did an episode.
I don't even remember if they talked about nullification surgeries.
What does it look like? Do you look like a Ken doll?
I think it's Barbie crutch.
Fuck.
Yeah.
So have like a little hole at the bottom for urine?
Yeah. Like your urethra is the only. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. In there, it's being advertised to people who've had phalloplasty. That's creepy. That's
like, because
really
like
upsetting.
the fallow failed. So let's go to the next. Like, what the fuck? Did you guys ever consider fallow?
I did for a while.
I thought about it, but I couldn't go there. It's too gruesome for my my stomach.
Yeah. When you read about the complications, just.
I just kept saying, "Oh, I'll do it once it's safer, once it's better, once they refine it."
You don't want to be the guinea pig? Why not?
But hearing some of the stories, like this one guy, he went in for fallow, and they actually took a skin graft from the wrong thigh and then had to do it on the other one. So he's got two massive gaping scars in his legs. And also then the way he talks about it after the fact is basically that it feels so foreign and so weird attached to his crotch. And it's like something that it's like a new kind of dysphoria that he has to deal with. And I think that's, people are getting it thinking, oh, now I'll have a penis. Perfect. And then it's like, this is not.
It doesn't feel like
it's not right. Sure. Yeah.
I mean, is there sensation in the like shaft of the penis? I mean, I know they try to preserve some nervings and preserve the ability to orgasm, but
I think it must feel like they're retaining sensation these days. Okay. Yeah. That wasn't always the case. I've definitely known some guys, they have no sensation at all.
That's not a game. It's just a gamble. I don't know why. Yeah.
I
wouldn't take it.
Yeah. Even like, like you got to get electrolysis. Like I've seen some photos of penises and vaginas that the electrolysis wasn't particularly effective, and so you basically have a dick covered in leg hair, or Or like
they take you have hair growing into your urethra,
which is worse.
Like, yeah.
Or you have tattoos on your donor tissues. So
yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. Yep, a tattooed phallus.
Like a big
faded tattoo.
A heart that says mom on it on your dick. But hey, if it makes people happy, fucking by all means, go for it.
I didn't realize this, but apparently part of it, the skin graft portion, I'm not super educated on the details of this, but there's like burn specialists who take care of that part of it. And this person was talking about how he was part of a multiple phalloplasties years ago, and he said most of them failed. And this was in response to something Barry Weiss had posted about transition something, and he was just down somewhere in the comments talking about the failure rate. And so I DM'd him. I'm like, what do you mean by failure rate? And he said at least about 60 to 70% just failed. And I was like, what does fail mean? He's like, they did not stay attached. And I was like, Jesus Christ, like
that'd be so traumatizing.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but these people aren't the ones who go onto the FTM forums and talk about their results. Right. And so the people who go on and talk about it are people who are like, yay, So.
Yeah. And there was that piece in New York Magazine, I think last year. I'm sure you guys saw this. There was a trans guy who, and the guy had gone through so much trauma. Like he had written for other outlets about asking a friend to like simulate rape on him because he had all of this latent trauma, and was like, and then wrote another piece for Rolling Stone about taking psychedelics to deal with trauma. It just seemed to be like going through all of the different therapies to try to find the thing that would fix them. And he kept his vagina, so he's got a dick and a pussy in the same. It's like real Swiss Army knife of genitals there.
Listening to that person's experience of life and then deciding, we should perform this really experimental, invasive, high failure rate surgery on them. Yeah, that's good medicine.
Doctors are psycho. Yeah.
And, I mean, another thing I'm hearing in like, Aaron, I don't know if this is like your experience back in the day, phalloplasty, I think it was kind of like, it was sort of considered mandatory for a long time. It's like you get the bottom surgery portion. But then around the time I was transitioning, 2012, it was a rarity. Like most people didn't do that. And certainly phalloplasty. Toidioplasty was more popular, but phalloplasty was just kind of like, that was for the people who are just so dysphoric about not having a proper, anatomically sized penis that they went that route. And it was oftentimes you see the results and it's like not really good. But apparently now I'm hearing from these FTM communities is it's like really popular to have this surgery, even for non-binary identifying people to go and get your phallo surgery, just like how people would talk flippantly about going and getting, top surgery previously. So that's pretty interesting and alarming.
Yeah. I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that transition related health, like because of the Affordable Care Act now, transition healthcare is mandated to be covered by insurance as well as things like Medicaid. And then also now there's, we've seen the rise in platforms like GoFundMe and things like that. Yeah. I mean, fuck, the people like my friends on Instagram, like people I still follow, you go to their Instagram stories and it's just like GoFundMe after GoFundMe, it's a queer, non-binary, whatever, help, Kale get the body he always wanted or whatever shit like that. So more funding covered by insurance. I would imagine that has something to do also with the rise in this kind of stuff. That's probably not something that Obama was thinking about when he crafted the legislation, make more dicks.
Yeah, 15, 20 years ago, I didn't know very many guys that were getting it done. And I think it probably is because it wasn't covered. We didn't have many surgeons in Canada that could do it. I remember years ago, it was even long before I transitioned even, but I went to a party. It was a guy who wanted a phalloplasty, who wanted to fundraise to get it done. So it was this big community party to raise money. And a guy that had it done walked out in a bathrobe and then disrobed and showed everyone, this is what he wants. This is what you're raising.
How'd it look?
And he had a really good result.
Yeah.
And I think the more of these good results you see, the more you think, it's kind of like the social contagion thing, right? I mean, you see more good results, it lowers the threshold for people wanting it. It's like, well, that person got it and that person got it and they seem to be doing okay, so I guess this is fairly risk-free, and now it's covered, and we've got a surgeon in Canada that does it, and so lots of guys now are getting it done.
Yeah, there was a time when, I would go to like top surgery fundraiser, top surgery benefits all the time. It was such a, you got a party out of it though, at least. And now you just donate to someone's GoFundMe. Less fun. There's also this thing that I've observed in the last couple of years with the rise of the non-binary thing, where people really like the aesthetic is really to be both or in the middle. So you'll have, a dude with like tits and a beard, or a they them with tits and a beard, or the aesthetic is masculine, maybe has top surgery and grows facial hair, but dresses really feminine. And it's bizarre, I don't mean that in sort of a judgmental way, but I think there's something for most people inherently, like there's something about that looks strange. And if you're in a queer community in Bellingham or Vancouver or Seattle or Asheville or whatever, and all of your friends are doing the same thing, it seems normal and it's part of the aesthetic and it's what people are doing and it's cool. But as soon as you leave that, people are going to fucking look at you.
I think that's the point though. I think it's meant to be strange. It's meant to be unsettling for people.
Yeah.
I think two things or three things are going on with those is with the whole queer theory, gender ideology, trans good, cis bad. It's actually like a virtue signal to be like, I'm not going to conform, I'm not going to pass as one or the other. Totally. I'm going to stand out as, what they call gender fuck or whatever. It's like, it's like projecting a moral position is totally. Basically what they're doing. And then it also fulfills that victimhood that's so important to having a strict religious belief. Is now they're experiencing transphobia everywhere they go because everybody looks at them like, what the fuck? And like, it's a self-fulfilling totally. Thing.
You do something that makes people look at you like you're a freak, and that, like, do it on purpose, and then you complain with people. I mean, in this, it's like goths being mad when people look at them weird. It is such an aesthetic, a weirdly aesthetic thing. What I want to know is, like, what happens when these people get older? Because most of us moderate as we get older. A lot of people who were radical queers grow up to be, like teachers and shit. They, you just like, you have kids, mm-hmm. Things change, you get out of the scene. And that's what I'm curious about is there going to be people who are like, why did that was a weird look, or if they'll maintain the
nursing home with a non-binary granny.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of unprecedented because what we're seeing simultaneously, like a youth counterculture merged with like a new religion sort of thing. And so what I'm wondering is so I don't think, no, they're not going to grow up and be like that. They're going to grow out of it. They're going to realize, holy shit, I got swept up in a trend. I did all this to my body. And so what I'm wondering is, how do they make sense of that? Like, you're seeing all these, most of the detransition stories that we're hearing now are people who had a very binary experience of their decision to transition. It's like, I want to be a man, I want to be a woman. And for whatever reason that failed. And they're like, oh shit, let's walk this back. But it makes sense. It's like, you wanted to do this thing, it didn't work, you got to take it back. This is the damage that's been done. And like, so to process that is one thing. It's terrible, but it makes sense. Like, people can understand that. But then I think the majority of people who are down the line, the majority of detransitioners are going to have been people who did the whole gender fuckery where they're microdosing on testosterone and they're having double mastectomies just to signal the group affiliation. And how do they make sense of that? Like, what mm-hmm. cognitively, how do you explain that to yourself, to other people? That's what I'm curious about.
It will be very interesting to see what happens. I do wish we could sort of fast forward through the next stage to get to find out what happens, but I guess give it time. It'll happen.
Or what happens when people age and they start becoming demented?
Oh yeah. I mean, there must be, people with Alzheimer's who look in the mirror and think, what the fuck who is that? I mean,
where's my penis?
Right. I guess blissfully you would probably forget about it, but it'd be like Memento, this sort of recurring horror of what you've done to your body. That is do you guys worry about that? Do you have dementia in your families?
I do have to. My grandpa on my mom's side had Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they'll have a cure by the time you get there.
It's kind of weird. Like Aaron and I have talked about this a few months back, but we always like looked in the mirror and expected to see, a masculine reflection, and that wasn't the case. And it was kind of like this disorienting feeling, and you kind of like avoid mirrors for that reason. And anyway, so maybe down the line we'll have the reverse experience of that. It's like, oh my God, who's this man?
Yeah, totally. Lots to look forward to.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Katie.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you guys.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Transparency Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please help out our algorithm by hitting like or subscribe. If you'd like to make a donation, follow the link to our PayPal account. On behalf of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, thanks for your support.